My fiancé's millionaire father demanded punctuality, but I was late. On the way, I stopped to give my lunch to a weathered homeless man, his grateful smile warming me more than any approval. When I finally stepped into the mansion, my stomach dropped. There, at the head of the table, sat the last person I expected. The delivery man looked nervous when he handed me the heavy black box. Special delivery for Katie Peters. Sign here, please. His hands shook as he held out the electronic pad. I signed my name, wondering why a simple delivery would make someone so jittery. The box was heavier than it looked, wrapped in expensive black paper with a silver ribbon that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. No return address, just my name written in elegant gold lettering across the top. Inside, nestled in expensive tissue paper that crinkled like whispered secrets, was a navy blue dress with a price tag that made me gasp. $3,000. I'd never even touched something that expensive, let alone owned it. The fabric felt like liquid silk between my fingers, and the cut was so precise it looked like it had been designed by someone who understood exactly how to make a woman look powerful and elegant simultaneously. Underneath lay a handwritten note in precise, old-fashioned script. Suitable attire for Saturday evening. Do not disappoint. B. My stomach dropped. B.H. Brandon Harrington. Sean's father, the ghost who'd haunted our relationship for 2 years without ever acknowledging my existence. The man Sean talked about in hushed, fearful tones whenever the subject of family came up. Sean walked through the door just as I was holding up the dress, trying to process what was happening. He took one look at it and sank into our kitchen chair like his legs had given out. Oh no, Katie, this is really happening. My father has never sent clothes to anyone before. This means... His voice trailed off, but the terror in his expression told me everything I needed to know. Sean, what does this mean? I held up the note, my hands trembling slightly. Why is your father sending me dresses? And why do you look like someone just told you the world was ending? He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. Because in his world, when Brandon Harrington sends you an outfit, it means you're about to face judgment. Real judgment. The kind that determines whether you're worthy of breathing the same air as his family. I set the dress carefully on our small dining table, treating it like it might explode. Judgment for what? I've never even met the man. That's exactly the point. Sean stood up abruptly, beginning to pace our tiny kitchen. Katie, my father doesn't do casual meetings. He doesn't invite people over for friendly dinners. When he wants to evaluate someone, he stages an event. Everything is planned, calculated, designed to test you in ways you won't even realize until it's too late. The dress seemed to mock me from across the room, its perfect navy blue fabric catching the afternoon light streaming through our window. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely terrifying. What kind of tests? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Sean stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete, helpless panic mixed with desperate love. Katie, do you remember when I told you about my college girlfriend, Amanda? I nodded. He'd mentioned her briefly once, saying things hadn't worked out because of family pressure. She lasted exactly 45 minutes at dinner with my father. He asked her about her family background, her career goals, her thoughts on various social issues. By the time dessert was served, she was excusing herself to go to the bathroom and never came back. I found her crying in the parking lot, saying she couldn't handle the interrogation. My mouth went dry. What did he do to her? He didn't do anything overtly cruel. That's what makes it so terrifying. He just dissected her. Asked questions that seemed innocent but were designed to expose every insecurity, every weakness, every reason why she might not be suitable for his precious family legacy. I thought about Amanda, whoever she was, fleeing into a parking lot rather than face another minute of Brandon Harrington's evaluation. And you think he's planning to do the same thing to me? Kitty, I know he is. This dress. Sean gestured toward it like it was contaminated. This isn't a gift. It's a uniform. He's telling you exactly how he expects you to look, how he expects you to present yourself. Everything about Saturday night will be on his terms according to his standards. The weight of what was happening started to sink in. How long has he been planning this? Sean's laugh was bitter, hollow. Probably since the day I told him I was serious about you. My father doesn't make impulsive decisions, Katie. He's been watching, waiting, gathering information. This invitation didn't come out of nowhere. It came when he decided he was ready to determine your fate. My fate. The words came out sharper than I intended. Our fate, he corrected quickly, but the damage was done. I could see it in his eyes. The knowledge that his father held the power to destroy our relationship with a single disapproving look. I walked over to the dress, running my fingers along its perfect seams. Someone had taken careful measurements, chosen the exact right size, the exact right color. Someone had been watching me, studying me, preparing for this moment. Sean, what happens if I fail his test? The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I honestly don't know, Katie. But I know what happened to my brother Michael when Dad decided his wife wasn't suitable for the family. What happened? Dad erased him. Completely. Changed his will, removed him from all family documents, banned him from ever setting foot on family property again. As far as Brandon Harrington is concerned, Michael doesn't exist anymore. The dress suddenly felt less like an elegant gift and more like a costume for my own funeral. I was about to face a man who had the power to erase people from existence, and he'd already chosen my outfit for the execution. Saturday arrived with gray skies that matched my mood perfectly. The navy dress hung in our closet like a silent accusation, waiting for me to transform into whatever version of myself Brandon Harrington expected to see. Sean had barely slept, tossing and turning beside me all night, muttering fragments of worried conversations in his dreams. The train station buzzed with weekend travelers, families heading to visit relatives, couples planning romantic getaways. I envied their carefree expressions as I clutched my ticket to Millbrook Heights, the exclusive enclave where Brandon had built his fortress of solitude. The ticket itself felt expensive, printed on heavy cardstock with gold lettering. Even the transportation to his world cost more than my usual monthly train pass. Finding my seat in the first-class car, another detail Sean had insisted upon, I settled by the window and watched the city slowly fade behind me. The familiar urban landscape of apartment buildings, corner stores, and busy intersections gave way to something entirely different. Suburban sprawl turned into manicured suburbs, which eventually transformed into vast estates separated by miles of pristine countryside. My reflection in the window showed a woman trying desperately to look like she belonged in Brandon's world. The navy dress fit perfectly, uncomfortably so, as if someone had been studying my measurements from afar. My hair was styled in a way that felt foreign, swept back into an elegant chignon that my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez had helped me achieve after 3 practice attempts. Even my makeup was different, applied according to YouTube tutorials for sophisticated dinner party looks. But beneath all the careful preparation, I was still just Katie Peters from Riverside Avenue, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, woman who ran literacy programs for underprivileged kids and shopped at thrift stores more often than department stores. The expensive clothes couldn't change that fundamental truth. The train's announcements grew more refined as we traveled deeper into wealth. Next stop, Millbrook Heights. Please gather all personal belongings. Even the conductor's voice sounded more cultured here, as if proximity to money required better diction. Stepping off at Millbrook Heights station felt like entering a movie set. Everything was too perfect, too clean, too intentionally beautiful. The platform was constructed from what looked like imported marble, with brass fixtures that gleamed despite the overcast sky. Fresh flowers in elaborate arrangements perfumed the air, and not a single piece of litter marred the spotless surfaces. Other passengers dispersed quickly, met by chauffeurs in expensive cars or heading toward the taxi stand where even the vehicles looked more luxurious than anything in my neighborhood. I stood alone on the platform, consulting the handwritten directions Sean had given me, when a well-dressed woman approached. "Excuse me, dear, are you lost?" Her smile was kind but curious, taking in my designer dress with obvious interest. "You don't look familiar, and we know most everyone here in Millbrook Heights." The casual assumption that she would know everyone spoke volumes about how insular this community was. "I'm visiting someone," I replied carefully, not wanting to name Brandon and potentially start gossip. "How lovely. Well, be careful walking. Some of the estate driveways can be quite long." She glanced at my shoes, elegant heels that Sean had purchased to match the dress. "Perhaps you should call for transportation?" I thanked her and started walking, choosing to interpret her concern as genuine rather than condescending. But her words echoed as I made my way through streets that felt more like museum exhibits than places where real people lived. Every house was a mansion, every lawn a perfect green canvas, every driveway populated with cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The sidewalks were pristine, lined with trees that had been professionally pruned into perfect symmetry. Street signs were crafted from elegant bronze rather than standard metal, and even the fire hydrants looked like decorative art pieces. This wasn't just wealth. It was wealth that had been carefully curated and maintained to create an artificial paradise. My phone buzzed with a text from Sean. Remember, arrive exactly at 7. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Dad respects punctuality above everything else. The pressure of perfect timing added urgency to every step. I found myself checking my watch obsessively, calculating and recalculating the distance remaining versus the time available. The stress was making my palms sweat despite the cool evening air, and I worried about arriving with visible signs of nervousness. As I walked deeper into the heart of Millbrook Heights, the houses grew larger and more imposing. Some were hidden entirely behind tall hedges or stone walls, revealing only glimpses of towers or chimneys that hinted at the grandeur within. Others stood proudly visible, displaying their architectural magnificence like peacocks showing their plumage. My grandmother's voice started whispering in my memory, stories she told me about dignity, about treating every person with respect regardless of their circumstances. Katie Mija, she used to say, the measure of your character isn't how you treat people who can help you, but how you treat those who can't. The memory brought unexpected comfort, reminding me that beneath this expensive costume, I was still the granddaughter of a woman who had cleaned houses to put food on the table but never lost her pride or compassion. Maria Santos had taught me that true worth came from within, not from the size of your house or the price of your clothes. But would those values help me survive whatever test Brandon Harrington had planned? Sean's instructions played on repeat in my mind. Don't mention my nonprofit work, don't talk about my family's modest background, don't be late, don't say anything controversial. Essentially, don't be myself. The conflict between staying true to my grandmother's teachings and following Sean's desperate guidelines created a knot of tension in my chest. Was I willing to pretend to be someone else just to gain approval from a man who judged people based on their social status rather than their character? A movement ahead caught my attention. An elderly homeless man sitting on a park bench in this pristine neighborhood, looking completely out of place among the manicured perfection. His presence seemed impossible here, where poverty would surely be swiftly removed by private security or local authorities. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until 7 o'clock. Plenty of time to reach the Harrington estate. But something about the man's solitary figure tugged at my conscience, reminding me of my grandmother's lessons about compassion. This was it, the moment that would reveal who I truly was beneath Brandon's expensive dress. The elderly man sat hunched against the evening chill, his thin frame seeming to disappear into the weathered wood of the park bench. Everything about him contrasted sharply with the polished perfection surrounding him. His clothes were patched and faded, his shoes worn through at the soles, his gray hair unkempt and wild. Yet there was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished by his circumstances. I found myself slowing my pace, then stopping entirely. Sean's voice echoed urgently in my memory. 17 minutes, Katie. You have exactly 17 minutes to get there and not a second longer. But looking at this forgotten soul in the heart of Millbrook Heights' pristine paradise, time seemed to suspend itself. The man noticed my hesitation and looked up. His eyes were startlingly blue, clear and intelligent despite the weariness etched into every line of his face. There was no pleading in his gaze, no expectation of charity. Just the weary acceptance of someone who had learned not to hope for kindness from strangers. Good evening, he said softly, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone who had once moved in educated circles. The contradiction struck me. Here was a man who spoke like a professor but sat like society's forgotten. Good evening, I replied, my feet apparently deciding to disobey my brain's commands to keep walking. Are you all right? A smile ghosted across his weathered features. Define all right, young lady. I'm breathing, which is more than some can say. Though I must admit, this October air has more bite than my jacket can handle. The admission was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. It made the contrast between his situation and my expensive outfit even more jarring. Here I was, wearing a $3,000 dress to impress a man I'd never met, while this gentleman shivered in clothes that wouldn't have cost $30 when they were new. My phone buzzed with another message from Sean. Please tell me you're almost there. Dad's assistant called to confirm timing again. The practical part of my mind calculated distances and walking speeds. I had maybe 15 minutes left and the Harrington estate was still several blocks away. Being late could destroy everything Sean and I had built together. Brandon Harrington had made his expectations crystal clear, punctuality above all else. But my grandmother's voice cut through the panic as clear as if she were standing beside me. Mija, when you see someone who needs help, you help. The rest is just noise. I'm sorry, the man said, noticing my distraction. I don't mean to keep you. You look like you have somewhere important to be. His eyes took in my elegant dress, the careful styling, the expensive shoes. Special occasion? Dinner, I managed, the word feeling inadequate to describe the trial awaiting me. With my fiancé's father. Ah. Something flickered in those intelligent eyes. The meeting that changes everything then. I remember those. There was a story behind that comment, layers of experience that spoke of a life once lived in different circumstances. But before I could ask what he meant, his stomach growled audibly in the silence. When did you last eat? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Yesterday, I believe. The shelter serves lunch at noon, but I... He trailed off, looking embarrassed. I seem to have lost track of time today. These streets all look the same after a while. The turkey sandwich in my purse had been my insurance policy. Something light to eat beforehand so I wouldn't be hungry during dinner with Brandon. Now looking at this man's hollow cheeks and the way his clothes hung loose on his frame, keeping it seemed impossibly selfish. Here, I said, pulling out the sandwich before I could second-guess myself. It's not much, but... He stared at the offered food as if I'd produced a miracle. Oh, my dear, I couldn't possibly. Please, I interrupted gently. My grandmother always said food tastes better when it's shared. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted the sandwich, and when he took that first bite, his eyes actually closed with what looked like relief. The gratitude in his expression was so pure, so genuinely appreciative, that it made my chest tight with emotion. Thank you, he said after swallowing. You have no idea what this means. But I was beginning to think I did. This simple act of sharing felt more meaningful than all of Sean's careful preparations for tonight. More real than the expensive dress I wore or the performance I was about to give. The man shivered again despite the sandwich, and I noticed how the evening breeze cut right through his thin jacket. Without thinking, I reached up and unwound the cashmere scarf from around my neck. The scarf Sean had specifically chosen to complement my outfit, the one that cost more than this man probably saw in months. You need this more than I do, I said, draping it around his shoulders. The soft gray fabric looked almost absurd against his worn clothing, like putting a silk bow on a package wrapped in newspaper. But the way his eyes widened, the careful way he touched the expensive material, made it the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. This is far too generous, he protested, but his hands clutched the scarf as if it were a lifeline. It's just a scarf, I lied, thinking of Sean's reaction when he noticed it was missing. No, the man said quietly, those penetrating blue eyes meeting mine directly. It's not just a scarf. It's proof that kindness still exists in a world that seems to have forgotten it. My phone buzzed insistently. Another message, probably from Sean, probably about timing. But for the first time all day I felt genuinely calm. Whatever happened at dinner tonight, whatever test Brandon Harrington had planned, I had already passed the only examination that mattered to me. I have to go, I said reluctantly. Of course you do. And thank you truly. You've reminded an old man that there are still good people in this world. As I walked away, his words followed me. I was now officially, irrevocably late for the most important meeting of my life. Sean would be devastated. Brandon would be disapproving. Our entire future hung in the balance. But somehow, carrying the memory of that grateful smile and those wise blue eyes, I felt more prepared for whatever awaited me than all of Sean's coaching could have achieved. The Harrington estate loomed before me like a fortress designed to intimidate. Massive stone columns supported a portico that could have housed my entire apartment, while towering windows stared down like unblinking eyes. But it was the figure pacing frantically at the top of the steps that made my heart sink. Sean, checking his watch obsessively, his face already twisted with anxiety. The moment he spotted me hurrying up the manicured walkway, his expression transformed. The concerned fiancé disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. His eyes were wild, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice carried a venom I'd never heard before. 17 minutes, Katie. 17. He grabbed my arm as I reached the top step, his grip tight enough to leave marks. Do you have any idea what you've just done? What this means? His fury should have terrified me, should have sent me into apologetic spirals of explanation. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm settling over me. The warmth from the homeless man's grateful smile still lingered in my chest, creating a buffer against Sean's rage. I'm sorry I'm late, I said quietly, not because I truly felt sorry, but because some part of me still hoped to salvage this situation. There was someone who needed help. Someone who needed help? Sean's voice climbed to a dangerous pitch. You were late to the most important meeting of our lives because you stopped to chat with some vagrant? The word vagrant hit me wrong, carrying a dismissiveness that made me want to defend the dignified man I just met. He wasn't a vagrant, Sean. He was a human being who was cold and hungry. A bum, Katie. You stopped to help a bum when you should have been here on time looking perfect. Sean's hands were shaking now, whether from rage or panic I couldn't tell. This isn't one of your non-profit charity cases. This is my father. The contempt in his voice when he said, charity cases revealed something ugly that I'd never noticed before. How long had he felt this way about my work? How many times had he bitten back similar comments about the people I served? His eyes suddenly focused on my neck and his face went completely white. Where is it? Where is what? The scarf, Katie. The $700 cashmere scarf that was specifically chosen to match your dress. The one that was supposed to show my father that you understand quality, that you belong in our world. My throat felt dry. I gave it away. The words hung between us like a confession of murder. Sean stared at me as if I'd just admitted to burning down an orphanage. You gave it away, he repeated slowly, each word dripping with disbelief. To who? To the man on the bench. He was shivering and You gave a $700 scarf to a homeless bum? His voice cracked on the last word. Katie, what is wrong with you? That scarf was chosen specifically for tonight. It was part of the plan. It was supposed to show my father that you can fit into his world, that you understand value and worth and... I do understand worth, I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Just not the same way you do, apparently. Before Sean could respond, the massive front doors opened with silent precision. A butler emerged, tall, thin, and so formally dressed he looked like he'd stepped out of a Victorian novel. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I caught something in his eyes as they took in our obvious tension. Judgment, perhaps. Or maybe just weary familiarity with family drama. Mr. Harrington is expecting you, the butler said, his voice carrying the kind of crisp British accent that spoke of expensive education and careful breeding. Please follow me. Sean immediately straightened, his rage transforming into barely controlled panic. He grabbed my hand, his palms sweaty despite the cool evening air. Remember what I told you, he whispered urgently as we crossed the threshold into the mansion's foyer. Let me do the talking. Don't mention your job. Don't talk about your family. And for God's sake, don't mention the homeless man or the scarf. The interior of the mansion was even more intimidating than its exterior. We walked through halls that felt more like museum galleries, lined with paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Classical sculptures occupied alcoves between doorways, and Persian rugs so beautiful I was afraid to step on them stretched across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Our footsteps echoed in the vastness, creating a rhythm that felt like a funeral march. Sean's grip on my hand tightened with each step, his whispered instructions becoming more frantic. Don't stare at the artwork. Don't ask questions. Keep your answers brief and respectful. Remember, this man has destroyed businesses with a single phone call. He's ruined lives because someone served him the wrong wine. Katie, please be perfect. The desperation in his voice should have made me feel sorry for him. Instead, it made me realize how much our entire relationship had been built on his need for me to be something other than myself. How many times had he coached me on what to say, how to act, who to be? And I'd gone along with it, thinking it was love, thinking it was protection. But after giving my sandwich to a grateful stranger, after seeing the genuine appreciation in those intelligent blue eyes, I understood the difference between someone who valued my kindness and someone who wanted to hide it. We stopped before a set of carved wooden doors that looked heavy enough to stop an army. The butler's hand moved to the ornate brass handles, and Sean's grip on my fingers became almost painful. "This is it," he breathed, his face pale with terror. "Katie, everything we've worked for, everything we've planned, it all depends on the next hour. Please don't let me down." The doors opened with theatrical silence, revealing a dining room that belonged in a palace. A table stretched the length of the room, its polished surface reflecting the light from a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my childhood home. And there at the far end sat a solitary figure. My knees nearly buckled with shock. It was him, the homeless man from the park bench. The weathered face, the intelligent blue eyes, the quiet dignity that had drawn me to help him despite Sean's warnings about punctuality. But he wasn't homeless. He was Brandon Harrington. And around his shoulders, like a badge of honor against his now revealed expensive clothing, was my gray cashmere scarf. Behind me, Sean made a sound that was part gasp, part whimper. I felt him go rigid with horror as the truth crashed over him. His fiancé hadn't just helped some random vagrant. She'd helped his father. The father he'd spent weeks teaching her to impress. The father he'd called a bum not 5 minutes ago. The silence in that vast room was deafening as 3 people processed the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Brandon Harrington rose from his chair with fluid grace, and I realized that even his posture had been part of the performance on the park bench. Gone was the hunched, defeated figure I'd encountered earlier. This man stood tall, commanding, with the bearing of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. "Katie," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle warmth I remembered, but now with an underlying authority that filled the vast dining room. "Please come in. Don't mind the theatrical entrance. I do apologize for the deception earlier this evening." The kindness in his tone was such a stark contrast to Sean's harsh words that I felt tears prick at my eyes. After an hour of being berated for my choices, having someone speak to me with genuine respect felt like a gift. "I don't understand," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Brandon's smile was patient, understanding. "Of course you don't. Please take a seat." He gestured to the chair directly to his right, the position of honor at the long table. "I have quite a story to tell you both." Sean hadn't moved from the doorway. He stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions of horror, confusion, and dawning comprehension. When Brandon's eyes finally shifted to acknowledge his son's presence, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Sean," Brandon said, his voice now devoid of warmth. "You may join us or you may leave. The choice, as always, is yours." The dismissive tone made Sean flinch visibly. He stumbled forward like a man in a trance, taking a seat far down the table, as far from both of us as possible. The distance felt symbolic. He was no longer part of the inner circle, no longer the favored son whose approval mattered. I moved to the chair Brandon had indicated, my legs unsteady. The cashmere scarf still draped around his shoulders looked almost regal now, transformed from a homeless man's borrowed warmth into what it truly was, a token of character proven under pressure. "You're wondering how long I've been doing this," Brandon said, settling back into his chair with the ease of someone completely comfortable with his own power. "The answer is 37 years. Ever since my late wife pointed out that everyone who came into our lives seemed to want something from us rather than simply wanting to know us." He paused, his fingers absently stroking the soft fabric of my scarf. "She suggested I find a way to see people's true nature when they believed their actions had no consequences. When they thought no one important was watching." The butler appeared silently, pouring wine from a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Brandon waited until we were alone again before continuing. "I've sat on park benches in disguise outside the homes of potential business partners, watching how they treated their gardeners or delivery staff. I've posed as a janitor in office buildings to observe how executives behaved when they thought no one of importance could see them. I've been a homeless man on street corners, an elderly customer struggling with heavy groceries, a confused tourist asking for directions." My mind reeled at the implications. How many people had unknowingly been tested by one of the most powerful men in the country? "What I've learned," Brandon continued, "is that kindness is the rarest commodity in the world. Rarer than gold, more valuable than diamonds. Most people, when faced with someone who can offer them nothing in return, simply look away. They're too busy, too important, too focused on their own agendas to spare even basic human decency. Sean's face was pale as death. I could practically see him replaying every word he'd said about the bum who had made me late, every dismissive comment about my charitable work, every instruction to hide my true nature. You, Katie, Brandon said, turning to face me directly, stopped when you had every reason to keep walking. You were late for what you believed was the most important meeting of your life. You were wearing expensive clothes and carrying yourself like someone with somewhere important to be. And yet, when you saw someone in need, you didn't hesitate. He lifted the sandwich wrapper that still sat on the elegant china plate beside him. You gave away your only food. Not your spare change, not your leftover lunch, but your only sustenance for the day. And when you saw I was still cold. He touched the scarf again, his eyes growing distant. This scarf costs more than some people make in months. It was specifically chosen to impress me, wasn't it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. And you gave it away without a second thought to keep a stranger warm. Not because you expected recognition or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Across the table, Sean made a sound that might have been a sob. I've tested hundreds of people over the years, Brandon continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. Heirs to fortunes who stepped over me like I was garbage. CEOs who lectured me about the importance of hard work while refusing to spare a dollar for someone they assumed was lazy. Politicians who gave speeches about compassion but couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence. He stood up, moving to the windows that overlooked his pristine estate. They all passed their professional interviews. They all had perfect resumes, impeccable references, flawless presentations. But when it mattered, when character was the only currency that counted, they revealed themselves to be bankrupt. The silence stretched between us until Sean finally found his voice. Dad, You what? Brandon turned, and for the first time, I saw the full force of his disappointment focused on his son. You coached her to hide her charitable work because you thought I'd see it as weakness? You taught her to conceal her humble background because you were ashamed of her parents' honest work? You spent weeks training her to be someone else entirely because you assumed I valued appearance over substance. Each question landed like a physical blow. Sean's shoulders hunched forward as if he were trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Worse than that, Brandon continued, his voice deadly quiet. Tonight, when she showed you exactly the kind of character that makes someone truly valuable, you called her actions foolish. You dismissed a man you thought was homeless as a bum. You treated her act of kindness like a betrayal. Brandon moved back to his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled. Sean, you've failed every test that matters. Not just tonight but for years. You've shown me that you value the wrong things, judge people by the wrong standards, and would rather have a beautiful puppet than a partner with genuine character. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sean's face crumpled and I realized he was crying, not the angry tears of earlier, but the broken sobs of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. However, Brandon said, and something in his tone made both Sean and me look up sharply. Character can be learned. Values can be corrected. And thankfully for you, son, Katie has enough integrity for both of you. He smiled at me, the same grateful expression I'd seen on the park bench. Shall we discuss wedding plans? The dinner that followed Brandon's revelation was unlike anything I could have imagined. What I had expected to be an interrogation became the most genuine conversation I'd had in months. Brandon leaned forward in his chair, his eyes bright with curiosity as he asked about my literacy program. Tell me about the children you work with, he said, cutting into what looked like the most expensive piece of beef I'd ever seen. What drew you to education? For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to filter my words or worry about sounding too passionate. There's this 8-year-old girl named Maria. She came to us barely able to write her own name, convinced she was stupid because she'd been struggling in school. Last month, she read her first full chapter book and cried because she was so proud of herself. Brandon's smile was genuine, transforming his entire face. That must have been incredibly rewarding. What's your philosophy about reaching struggling readers? As I explained my methods, my theories about learning differences, my dreams of expanding the program, I noticed Sean sitting silently at the far end of the table. His untouched food grew cold as he watched his father engage with the very topics he had forbidden me from discussing. Every enthusiastic response from Brandon seemed to wound him deeper. Your parents must be very proud, Brandon continued. What do they think of your work? I found myself talking about my father's influence, how his classroom stories had inspired my love of teaching. I described my mother's work at the community clinic, her dedication to helping families who couldn't afford private health care. With each word, I watched Brandon's respect for me grow, and I saw Sean's face pale as he realized his father was praising everything he had told me to hide. Remarkable, Brandon said, raising his wine glass. To parents who instill values that money can't buy. The toast felt directed at Sean as much as at me. When Brandon asked about my future plans, I found myself sharing dreams I hadn't even told Sean. Ideas about opening learning centers in underserved communities, training teachers in new methodologies, maybe even writing a book about literacy education. I'd like to fund that, Brandon said simply. I nearly choked on my wine. I'm sorry. Your learning centers. Consider it my first official investment in your future. Our future, he corrected, gesturing between himself and me. Family invests in family. Sean made a strangled sound from his end of the table, and for the first time since we'd arrived, Brandon addressed him directly. Something to add, son? I never knew Katie had such detailed plans, Sean whispered, his voice thick with shame. She never told me about the book idea or the expansion dreams. Did you ever ask? Brandon's question was quiet but cutting. The silence that followed answered everything. The remainder of dinner passed with Brandon treating me like the daughter he'd never had while Sean sat in exile at the other end of the table. When the butler finally cleared the last plates, Brandon walked us to the front door personally, an honor I suspected few guests received. Sean, he said as we reached the entrance, his hand resting on the door handle. You have a choice to make. You can continue being the man who sees Katie's kindness as weakness, or you can become someone worthy of her character. But understand this. Her place in this family is secure regardless of your decision. The car ride home was a tomb of silence. Sean gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I watched the familiar streets blur past through my own reflection in the passenger window. By the time we reached our apartment, I could hear his breathing becoming labored, irregular. The moment our front door closed behind us, Sean collapsed. He didn't just cry, he shattered. His whole body shook as sobs tore through him, and he slumped against our kitchen counter like his strings had been cut. I had never seen a grown man break down so completely, and despite everything he had put me through, my heart ached for him. Katie, I'm so sorry, he gasped between sobs. I'm so incredibly sorry. Not just for tonight but for everything. For 2 years of trying to make you into someone else. For being ashamed of the things that make you beautiful. For caring more about impressing my father than protecting the woman I love. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I spent so much time being terrified of his judgment that I became exactly the kind of person he despises. And I tried to turn you into that too. The raw honesty in his voice made something shift inside me. This wasn't the polished, controlling Sean I'd been living with. This was someone stripped bare, finally seeing himself clearly. I watched him tonight, Sean continued, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Watched him light up when you talked about your work, your parents, your dreams. Things I told you to hide because I thought they weren't good enough. Katie, you've been good enough this whole time. You've been better than good enough. I'm the one who wasn't worthy. Over the following weeks, I witnessed a transformation that seemed impossible. Sean began volunteering at my literacy program, initially awkward and uncertain but gradually finding his own way to connect with the children. He started asking me about my work not to critique it but because he genuinely wanted to understand what mattered to me. He called his brother Michael for the first time in 5 years, apologizing for not standing up to their father's judgment of Sarah. He researched my field, reading articles about educational equity and learning differences, not to control my conversations but to be a better partner in them. Most surprisingly, he began developing his own relationship with Brandon based on respect rather than fear. They started having regular dinners where Sean listened more than he spoke, learning about the values that truly mattered to his father. 3 months later, I stood in my parents' backyard surrounded by white folding chairs and simple flower arrangements that my mother and I had made ourselves. The ceremony was everything I had always wanted. Intimate, authentic, focused on love rather than spectacle. Brandon sat in the front row wearing a perfectly tailored suit and my gray cashmere scarf, which he had insisted on keeping as a reminder of the day his real daughter joined the family. He walked me down the aisle when my father's emotional state made it clear he wouldn't make it through without sobbing. "Thank you," Brandon whispered as he placed my hand in Sean's, "for showing an old man that there are still people in this world who choose kindness over convenience." Sean's vows were simple but profound. "Katie, I promise to never again ask you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Your compassion saved not just my relationship with my father, but my relationship with myself. I promise to spend the rest of my life becoming the man worthy of your heart." As I looked out at our small gathering, my parents crying happy tears, Brandon beaming with genuine pride, Sean's eyes reflecting a love based on who I truly was rather than who he wanted me to become, I thought about that moment on the park bench when I'd chosen kindness over punctuality. That single decision had changed 3 lives completely. Brandon had found the authentic relationships he'd been searching for through decades of testing. Sean had discovered that love meant celebrating someone's character rather than trying to change it. And I had learned that the right choice might not always be the easy choice, but it will always lead you to where you're meant to be. The homeless man's grateful smile had been worth more than a millionaire's approval. It had earned me a family that loved me exactly as I was. If this story of unexpected redemption touched your heart, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Katie chose compassion over punctuality, not knowing she was being tested by the very man she was trying to impress. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.